Hello, everyone. This is Amy Brown. I'm the Director of Events and Education for Trade Press Media Group and Progressive Railroading. Thank you for joining us for today's webcast, Securing Rail Operation Systems in the Age of Connectivity. Our presenters today are Amir Levitel, Mark Grant, and Tom Farmer. Amir is the CEO and co-founder of Silas, which provides cybersecurity solutions for the rail industry. Prior to founding Silas, Amir served as the director of cyber R&D for the Israeli Defense Forces Elite Technological Unit. And with over 20 years of experience in cyber defense management and deployment, Amir has led highly skilled teams in the development and deployment of complex cybersecurity, software, and hardware projects. He received his master's degree in electrical engineering from Tel Aviv University and has held pivotal roles in teams awarded the coveted Israeli Defense Prize for exceptional technological breakthroughs and proudly received high military honors for extraordinary achievement and exponential contributions to the national security. Mark is former Cisco of CSX Corporation, whose rail network encompasses 20,000 miles of track in 23 states and plays a vital role in the nation's supply chain. Mark is a recognized expert in the railroad industry with decades of experience protecting critical infrastructure. In addition to his security roles at CSX, Mark ran their IT operations and data center, directly supporting CSX's extensive 24/7 business operation. Mark's CSX career focused on enabling trains to run securely and reliably, where he leveraged a deep and broad technical background. He now serves as a trusted advisor to companies to enhance their IT security and business strategy, and has a PhD in condensed matter physics from the University of Florida and an MBA from Jacksonville University. Tom Farmer is the Assistant Vice President for Security with the Association of American Railroads, as he manages the security plan and program, physical and cyber, for North American railroad industry. His responsibilities include assuring sustained effectiveness in the industry's security management plan to meet the current and emerging threats, overseeing the intelligence and security information sharing and alert notification functions of the Railway Alert Network, enhancing capabilities for railroads' use in implementing plans, practice, and procedures, and ensuring necessary support for railroads' response and recovery in emergency situations. We're excited to have all three of them joining us for today's webcast. A few learning objectives before we get into the content. Just a reminder, this webcast will go over how to learn to start your rail operation system cyber protection program, discuss best practices in connecting security and rail operations to build an effective cybersecurity program, review the threat landscape to rail operation systems, and discuss the potential challenges in cybersecurity implementation and how to overcome them. Before we jump into the content, I'd like to just go over a few details about today's event. We do encourage audience questions throughout the webcast, and to submit a question, please navigate to the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen and type in your questions. We will try to answer as many questions as time permits, and we have an extended Q&A for the second half of this presentation. At the conclusion of today's webcast, you'll receive a PDF copy of the slides used today. And with that, I'll turn it over to Amir to start the content.
Hi, everyone. Thank you very much, Amy, for hosting us. Thank you, everyone, for joining this session. And thank you so much, Mark and Tom, for joining us for this presentation, doing it together during the coming hour. I'm here in Tel Aviv. Behind me, you can see Tel Aviv. It's 8 p.m. here, so it will become more and more dark during the presentation. So let's start. We'll talk today about securing rail operation system in the age of connectivity. The main focus, as Amy mentioned, the main focus is to connect the dots between rail operations and cybersecurity, how we deal with digital technologies in the age of digital technology, when we need to continue to operate railroads while improving and maintaining cybersecurity of our systems. Together with me in this presentation, we'll have, as Amy mentioned, Mark and Tom. So I'll let Mark and Tom to introduce themselves in this context of operations and cybersecurity. Mark, please.
Okay, thanks, Amir. Thank you also, Amy, for the introduction. I'll just make a brief comment that I think the most helpful role that I can play in this discussion is really coming at this as a practitioner. And so, you know, we've got kind of Amir as with a lot of background in history and acting as a supplier. Tom, which I've worked with for many years, you know, kind of representing the industry perspective. But what I'll try to do is really bring comments from a practitioner standpoint, having worked for decades kind of in the trenches in a railroad.
Tom, please.
Thank you, sir, very much. And I thank Amy, Amir, and others in Progressive Railroading for this opportunity. It's also a privilege to be reunited with my colleague and friend, Mark Grant. We did work for an extended period, I think more than 10 years together, in the group that I am very proud to be a part of, which is the Rail Information Security Committee, the coordination forum for all matters pertaining to cybersecurity in the railroad industry for the US and Canada. And so in that group, we have chief information security officers, cybersecurity leads for the 7 Class 1 railroads. So that encompasses BNSF Railway, CSX Transportation, CN, which is Canadian National, Canadian Pacific, Kansas City Southern, Norfolk Southern, and Union Pacific. We also have representation by Genesee and Wyoming Railroad, which owns and operates dozens of regional and short line carriers in the US and Canada and beyond, as well as commuter representation through the Virginia Railway Express, a commuter railroad in the Washington, D.C. area. RailLink, which is the information support system for railroad operations generally, is a participant in the committee as well. And my organization, the Association of American Railroads, AAR, and the American Shortline Regional Railroad Association provide participation and support. The collective effort is very much focused on accentuating what we can do well in securing rail networks. And so this forum provides an ability, and it's been in existence for more than 2 decades, an ability for railroads to share experiences with threat activity, suspect activity, anomalies, work that they've done in responding to those concerns. It's an excellent forum for sharing effective practices. And the entire purpose is to elevate the cybersecurity baseline across the industry. And we'll have more to say about those efforts as we proceed through the webinar this afternoon. But I will say when I was hired for my position 12 years ago, the word cyber did not appear in the job description. Now it's easily half of what I do. And if I do it well, it's because of the participants in our industry security committee that have helped me understand this threat, help me understand this problem, and most importantly, help me understand how we can accentuate our capabilities to address it effectively. So thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Tom. So your recent comment about the evolving threat of cybersecurity is the most relevant here in terms of digitalization and so on. We will talk about it later. In this context of this presentation, except of my experience that Amy mentioned in the Elite Technological Unit of an Intelligence Corps in Israel, in terms of cybersecurity for infrastructure, and my recent experience with companies, rail companies around the world, in Europe, Asia Pacific, and of course in the US market, and of course in Israel, our hometown, I can provide some insights and some experience that from working with those companies, and I'll try to share with you our insights. So let's start. So the rail industry is going over a new era of connectivity. It's not new. In the recent 20 years, it became more and more, the system became more and more connected, more rely on digital technologies. It's both on the interface between the infrastructure to the trains, and in railroad is being implemented by using technologies, PTC, positive train control. In the dispatching systems, and on board. All these new technologies that improve efficiency, improve safety or maintain safety in the high level, the railroads, and maintain it over the years, are also open a new attack surface to cyber threats. We'll talk about it, about the attack surface in this discussion. But Mark, what is your comment about on PTC and the threat?
Yeah, so briefly, I think you touched on the key point from my perspective, Amir, which is the additional attack service. So particularly with the implementation of positive train control, that not all railroads actually have positive train control, but I think what that project has driven across the industry is the implementation of additional technologies, whether that's on the wayside, on the locomotive. And the challenge is, and I think a lot of the risk comes into the equation with that additional attack service, is because all of those components ultimately tie back in most cases, to the core operations in the data center through PTC in the back office, and then ultimately into the dispatching environment and other environments. And so there's connectivity there. Now, railroads do a great job of isolating that and protecting it. But the reality is that the connectivity is broad. And so I think that the technologies, the challenge from a technology perspective is to stay abreast of that. So you have to stay out in front of these emerging technologies, and they're going to continue to develop. So PTC is really just a platform, and I think most rails are thinking about that platform as something that they can leverage in the future for additional technologies. And so the connectivity is going to continue to increase. And what that means is, railroads have to continue to pay attention to that. And I think with the folks that I've worked with in the industry, everyone understands that, and everyone has programs against that. But you've got a situation where the technologies evolve over time. The reliance on those technologies of the business evolves over time, and at the same time, you have the threat, which also evolves. So that's really the challenge, I think, in addressing this connectivity.
Yeah. Thank you, Mark. Tom, what do you think about that, about connected applications and moving forward with that?
Well, I think Mark has covered well some of the security concerns that come into play. But I think meriting emphasis is, what do these technological advances do? They make us more efficient from an operational perspective, which means we're better at moving passengers, better at delivering cargo. Our safety enhances. And I think we don't want to surrender to the adversaries in the sense that we get overly concerned with the fact that we're introducing new technologies. The key is, are we introducing new technologies in a smart way, aware of the risk associated with them? I think the answer to that clearly is yes in the railroad industry. Part of that is the commitment the industry has had to cybersecurity dating back more than 2 decades. That committee I referenced in my opening remarks convenes twice a month. They're actually meeting in person this week at our offices in Washington, D.C. The first time since the pandemic that we've gotten the group back together in person. But that focus on understanding the risk environment, on taking actions to narrow the profile of the industry to those concerns, of learning from what's happened in other industries. And I think you do have much that can be gleaned from prior attacks that have exploited older industrial control systems, older networks that manage operations. And I think there's a key distinction to keep in mind between attacks that we've seen that have targeted older networks where essentially the technology drove the development of the infrastructure, and what you have in railroads where the technology is an overlay on the infrastructure. And so in a sense is adapted to it. And importantly, is designed with cyber threats in mind. So positive train control as part of the preparations that the Rail Information Security Committee undertook. One was to engage a national laboratory That laboratory did a thorough review of the sorts of cyber risks that could be associated with the implementation of positive train control. That information was used by railroads working through the committee I referenced, as well as a group called the Railway Electronics Security Committee, to work on ways in which PTC could be designed to narrow susceptibility to the sorts of threats that we'd seen previously. I think a key element too is consistent and continuous network monitoring for anomalies, and some of the design features that have narrowed the potential for adversaries to exploit what admittedly is an expanded connectivity service. And I think we'll get into more of some of the key points in that regard as we progress today. But thank you for the opportunity to address that point.
Thank you very much. Also, my experience from the global view is that the awareness in railroads is very high. People on the companies dealing with cybersecurity, they understand what they need to do, and they appointed the right people. But it's a market that evolves, and we need to continue to improve ourselves, continue to make the systems efficient, more digital, and also in parallel continue to maintain cybersecurity. So when we speak about rail network, why it's so hard to defend them? So we segmented it into 3 categories. The first thing, which is obvious, rail networks are spread over a large geographical area with dark territories and connected territories, multiple touch points with infrastructure. The trains themselves are moving between and doing handovers between regions. These kind of technologies are not similar. There is no other industry where your data center is moving between places, and you need to protect them. So it's a unique environment that we need to deal with. The second thing, since these systems are huge and based on multi-vendor supply chain, the systems were designed or were tested for interoperability, and everything works one with each other. But the cybersecurity part of the integrated systems, usually in between the interfaces between vendors, between systems, these are the weak link in the chain. We have some examples of attacks that we saw with customers where the attackers leverage the interfaces between these systems. Most of the work of the rail companies is to make sure that the systems are interoperable. We need also to make sure that they are secure in this interface. And we can see that it's a growing trend in cybersecurity. The second thing in terms of technology are the principles of the railroads. The principle of railroads, the rail industry in general, the main principle for safety is the fail-safe mechanism. A fail-safe mechanism is very important principle for making sure that the system is safe. Whenever something goes wrong, the train should stop, because this is the most safest mode of the trains, which is super important for safety. But from cyber perspective, from the threat actor perspective, once you're able to initiate this fail-safe mechanism, which could happen because at the end there is a process of communication between 2 components, and once you have an attacker within the network, it can send that the threat actor can send a command that is not according to this procedure and to initiate a fail-safe mechanism. Once it succeeds to do that, and repeatedly every few hours or days, it might make denial of service, which the impact is obvious. So this mechanism are super important. There are other examples for principles in the rail industry that might be leveraged for making attacks. And the last thing is the operational perspective. In these systems, we have systems that have long service life of 30 years, sometimes more than that. And they were designed in the beginning or today for the existing threats, cybersecurity. No one ignored cybersecurity, but the threats evolve over time and the systems cannot be evolved over time by default. And this is mostly because of the challenge of updating these systems. By default, operational, the mode of operation is whenever the system, if the system works well, we prefer not to update it because we don't want to change a safety case and we don't want to change and we want to continue to operate the system, which makes sense from an operational point of view. In cybersecurity, in other environments, the default is whenever there is a new update, a new patch, you want to update the system. So we need to find a way to maintain to narrow the gap between the need to patch everything whenever it goes, whenever there is a new threat and new vulnerability found, to the fact that we want also to continue to operate the systems and continue to maintain the environment. Tom, what do you think about that?
One of the, okay,
Go ahead, Tom.
please, you can go ahead, Mark.
I was just going to comment on I think this slide is about, some of the challenges. And for me, security in these environments have a number of important stakeholders. I mean, clearly the security practitioners at the railroads understand the risks, they understand techniques for protecting the environments. But the perspective of the business, and in this case, it's typically the operations departments, is also super important. And Amir, you talked to some of the challenges in terms of, the time scale of making changes and, the relative care that you have to give on these systems compared to some of the easier systems to manage. But I also think the suppliers are part of that ecosystem as well. And I know Tom's done a lot of work in that area, and I have been involved in a number of those initiatives also. But you have the supply. A lot of these technologies, are delivered to the railroads, whether it's at a component basis or entire systems. And I think increasingly, some of the railroads, in my experience, have been using cloud solutions. So there's the supplier of the technologies, which also have to be engaged in protection. And that's suppliers both on the technologies that are being leveraged for business purposes, but also on security solutions for those environments. And all of these folks have to sort of work together in order to deliver a truly secure environment. And that is something that used to be quite difficult, I would say, 10 years ago. But increasingly, boards of directors are aware of the risks. They're asking questions. Increasingly, the operations department understand that they have a role in securing the environment also. It's not just the IC security team with their finger, in the dam, sort of keeping the attackers at bay. It's really a collaborative effort that needs to take place across the business and with suppliers.
So building on Mark's points, yes, this slide focuses principally on challenges. I think in challenges, you see where opportunities are to manage, mitigate, overcome those challenges. One of them Mark alluded to, and that's ensuring there is understanding, support from the top of the organization down through the users of computers and devices. And Mark was part of a group, and each one of the railroads are in a similar approach. Each quarter, cybersecurity is a subject that the boards of directors of the major railroads are very much interested in hearing updates about. Chief executive officers are well versed on cybersecurity concerns and on what railroads are doing to address them. We just had a group of chief executive officers for Class 1 railroads convene last week with the Transportation Security Administration. We had a classified briefing addressing current threats of concern. What was particularly illuminating, I think, for the agency in particular, was just how much the chief executive officers understood about the cyber threats, understood about the actions that their organizations were taking, understood about some of the challenges when, for example, government may be saying, you should be reporting everything. And our response is, if we report everything, you're going to have so much chaff and noise, you're not going to be able to get to the heart of where the real potential concerns are. So again, we get to this issue of this question of what are we doing to accentuate what we do well? That's one example. Another example is the expertise you assemble. Amir made the point, railroads are hiring the right people to do the right job. We have chief information security officers who've come up to the railroad and are intimately familiar with the network of operations. We have others who've come in from other industries. Some have come in from government. They bring a different perspective. They bring different experience. That contributes to a collective effort in our Industry Information Security Committee that is able to draw upon expertise and experience gained from a range of professional backgrounds. And so we can learn in depth about some of the concerns that have affected other industries, some of the challenges and concerns that pertain in government, and gear our efforts accordingly. This information sharing element is critical. And one of the roles that we take on at the Association of American Railroads is to be the information sharing center for the industry. And what we are privileged to benefit from is the vigilance that railroads maintain, where they identify activity of concern as directed at a network, something that strikes them as significant from a cybersecurity perspective. They report that to us. We work with them to develop a security advisory. And that advisory goes not just to the members of the Information Security Committee, but broadly across our industry, the 200s of railroads in the US and Canada. And we also share it with colleagues in other transportation modes and other sectors, other critical infrastructure sectors. So again, what can we do well? We can use information effectively, timely reporting from our organizations to alert railroads, other transportation entities, other sectors to the types of concerns we're seeing, what we're doing about it, and what they may be able to do about it to narrow their risk profile. And I can tell you, going back over the past couple of years, I can point to a half a dozen instances where that type of reporting allowed us to share an advisory industry-wide. And later in the day, we began to get some of the reporting from other railroads that were seeing the same type of activity. The difference was they had the advisory in hand. They'd already taken some of the measures that were recommended, and there was no exposure to the concern. And another avenue to consider is the partnership with government. And the term partnership, often we hope that it can be more than at times what it is, but we work very hard on maintaining productive relations with government. And it includes being clear with government officials what our needs are. And in particular, when government is directing solutions, as recently happened with the Transportation Security Administration issuing security directives to railroads on cybersecurity, emphasizing that the issuance of the directive and inspections under the directive is not the ultimate goal. The ultimate goal is enhancing cybersecurity posture. And when government takes a step of mandating requirements, it takes on a responsibility. That responsibility is to be in a position to provide the necessary support to make sure those directives accomplish their intended purposes. And a lot of that gets into this issue of what does government know from its analysis across sectors? What's government seeing, as an example, based on activity related to the war in Ukraine? And how is that being presented in a way that's supportive of informed vigilance and proactive security measures in industry? And one of the issues we've talked about this week with the Rail Information Security Committee members is how we can shape that interchange with government in a way that we're getting the sorts of products we need to be better positioned to have actionable information that allows us to enhance our cybersecurity posture. So as we consider challenges, it's also very important to consider the opportunities that come with those challenges. And we focus a great deal of effort on making sure we're doing what we can do as effectively as possible. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So definitely opportunities that are a result of challenges. It's the reason why we're here. We want to solve things. We don't want to talk only about challenges. So thank you very much for your explanations. You spoke about the war in Ukraine. So if we speak about the need, we can see that all over the world there are attacks on the rail industry. Specifically in Belarus, there was an attack a few months ago as part of the war between Russia and Ukraine. And when I participate in the UNIFE event. It's the European event for vendors. The main topic that they spoke there is about military mobility. It's a new term that they are using that speaks about the importance of protecting rail systems for moving military within Europe. So this is one aspect, and of course it's not the only aspect. Also freight, passenger, and other things are a real concern of the rail industry globally. By the way, any comments on that?
Just a comment on that from the perspective of what we do in our industry to learn from experience of other organizations. The focal point of what we strive to accomplish with the Railway Alert Network, and it provides the support to our industry on cybersecurity matters and physical security matters, is learning as much as we can from the types of activities reflecting these headlines, so that we can try to gain information on not simply that an event happened, but more importantly, how did it happen? What were the effects? And what were the sorts of measures that could be taken to narrow the susceptibility of railroads to similar types of activity? And our intelligence priorities with government organizations, with private security threat information providers, really focus on that outcome. Help us understand how cyber threats, particularly those directed against transportation, against railroads internationally, how do they happen? What are the tactics employed most often? What are the vulnerabilities that seem to be targeted over and over again? What are the indicators of compromise, indicators of concern that preceded the incident? And what protective measures were in place that made a difference or were lacking? And had they been in place, would have made a difference. And just a couple of weeks ago, Janet St. John, who leads our cybersecurity program at AAR, and I had a chance to meet with a colleague from the German Railway Association. We'd met with them right before the pandemic, and then obviously because of some of the exigencies associated with response to the pandemic, that connection hadn't achieved what we believed it could, and so we renewed the contact here within the past couple of weeks. Very much focused on ensuring we're sharing information between Europe, the US, and Canada among railroads on this sort of activity. And there's been a sea change in the attitude of railroads in Europe to this sort of sharing, driven largely by what's happened with the Russian invasion of Ukraine. So we have an opportunity, and all of it's focused on that same purpose. Ensuring we're helping railroads understand how these events happen, what occurred, what the indicators are, and what measures they can take to narrow their susceptibility. Thanks.
Thank you.
Hey, Tom, the only thing I would add to that is, I think there's the formal alerting processes that, that your team manages, which I think are exceptionally helpful to the industry. But there's also the informal, sort of communication that happens as a result of us, the industry investing the time to get to know each other and participate in those processes. And I can count, there were a number of times, when I was the CISO, where I saw something suspicious. I had questions about something that was happening either at my company or another company. And some of my first calls were out to the other CISOs in the industry to ask their perspective, or to ask them if they're seeing anything similar. So, it's a lot of the problems that we encounter in this world are around communication, but also a lot of the solutions involve communication as well. So I just want to emphasize that I totally agree that those communication and alert processes are super important.
Yeah, thank you. So I agree that information sharing that Tom highlighted it, and the fact that the companies around the world speak one to each other through, in Europe, the organization that for sharing information is ISAC, and then the US, you have your organization. So this kind of information sharing is super important, and informal information, as Mark mentioned. We also at Silos are doing research technologies to proactively look for vulnerabilities, and once we find vulnerability, we share it with the rail industry, with the manufacturer, and with the organization, formal organization. So not only waiting for the threat to come, but also proactively looking for these vulnerabilities. So a common effort of the ecosystem, including the manufacturers, the rail organizations, and the different committees is the right way to deal with cybersecurity. So we spoke back in 2 slides before about the practical challenges in securing the rail industry. Here we speak mostly about the practical challenges. So I think that we mentioned, Tom and Mark mentioned the responsibility of cybersecurity and rail operations and the importance of both sides to understand the constraints of the people that are responsible for cybersecurity, the department of the CISO, and the people that are responsible for rail operations to understand each constraint it needs and to work together in order to mitigate the threat. The rail operation is hugely important in terms of cybersecurity, as we mentioned before. As at the end, operations is the important thing in rail, and we all want to support the ability to operate the trains. In terms of response, in other industries, we usually deal with automatic response. So where there is an alert, there is a threat, we detected that, we want to automatically respond to the threat or to the detection. In the rail industry, since we are in the context of safety, it's not easy to implement such an automated response, because once you are doing automated response, so for example, changing the policy in the firewall in order to respond, you might change the safety case. So we need to deal with that challenge. There is and we spoke about it just now about threat intelligence. There is data of threat intelligence, but the access sometimes is limited. We can see it globally as a challenge. And the last but not least is that there are cybersecurity tools with a lot of install base in different industries, specifically for the rail environment with the proprietary systems, proprietary protocols. These tools are not necessarily fit to the needs, and we need other tools to improve cybersecurity. Mark, do you have any comment on that?
Just real quick, I think I can talk a little bit. So, just to provide maybe, some things that I have seen be successful in overcoming some of these challenges. I think that there is, most railroads have figured out governance processes around cybersecurity. Most of them are working with, one form of framework or another in order to implement their plans, which are enormously helpful. But I think, formally developing system security plans is one technique that you can use to help break down barriers, because it forces those conversations. And I think, going through and documenting the details really helps highlight, any gaps that exist. And so I think, that's one. If you haven't done that yet and you're a practitioner, that's one thing that can help. The other thing that I would mention is when you talk about, difficulty of implementing changes in these environments, you have to realize that going in. And so technologies that sort of overlay or are not disruptive and don't, require sort of a lot of installation on software and all the components in the environment, I think are typically easier to progress to provide the visibility that's needed.
Thank you, Mark. Tom?
A couple points in this area. And one, I mentioned earlier the engagement, the CEO and board level, but this slide gets into the practicalities and how does that translate into action throughout an organization where you maintain that attentiveness to cybersecurity. And railroads accomplish that in a number of ways. A key one is through exercises and drills. So as an industry, each year we hold an exercise that involves dozens of railroads from the US and Canada, partners in government, both in the US government and the Canadian government. And we take actual events that have happened in other industries and posit their direction at a railroad or some other aspect of our operations. And we focus on, okay, if we were confronted with this situation, how would we be handling it? How are we doing that collectively as an industry through the work provided through our Information Security Committee? How would railroads be responding individually to the events? What support is needed, with a particular focus on obtaining as much information as can be obtained and informing effective decision-making. But that challenging exercise takes place over a period of a few hours, usually each October. So that the key there is the integration of other functional elements in the organization. And so railroads will often have members of their operations teams, hazardous materials, environmental, legal, public communications as part of the exercise. And that helps bring home the significance of what we are talking about in terms of potential threats and the work that the railroad does both on its own, under its own incident response plans, and collectively with the industry. And that becomes especially important when you get into questions being asked of why are we sharing information? What benefits are we getting from it? The exercise helps us really demonstrate that in a very tangible way. Internally, railroads do all sorts of drills throughout the year that are focused on user awareness, so network user awareness. That can entail well-done phishing emails that they introduce and see how many people click to open a link or an attachment. It can involve leaving a thumb drive and seeing if anyone picks it up and plugs it into a computer that's attached to the network. It's a couple of examples of a broader initiative to translate training of users into practical applicability. And then I think Mark referenced earlier the work we do with suppliers. And I think they provide a potential wealth of information because they would tend to have awareness at an earlier point of vulnerabilities or other challenges with the software and hardware that they're providing. And we've reached out to some key suppliers and brought them into our Information Security Committee as a focused subgroup. And in doing that, we are sharing with them all of the information products I talked about earlier that are developed by the Railway Alert Network and materials we get that support those products. We've done that specifically to integrate them in a team concept. We well recognize that it is not easy for an organization that is a manufacturer or supplier of products or services to come forward and acknowledge that there may be some defect, some deficiency, some flaw. And so part of this approach we've taken with the suppliers group is we'll bring you into the fold. You see what we're focused on and why. All we're asking from you is let us know as early as you can if some of those concerns about supply chain vulnerabilities apply or pertain to what you provide to us. And we actually had a good practical test of how that can work with the BlackBerry QNX software vulnerability, where because we had this supplier group in industry, because the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency at the Department of Homeland Security was trying to help BlackBerry get the security solution to the right organizations. What they found is that BlackBerry had licensed its software and allowed its use and sold it in ways that made it very difficult to track where it was in use. Our suppliers group, we brought them together. They were briefed by CISA. And one of the key outcomes was when the vulnerability was eventually publicized, as BlackBerry was required to do, by that point, the security solutions were in place for those organizations that had the affected software. We had no disruptions, no exploits in our industry. So all of that's designed to try to make sure we're leveraging the capabilities that we have across the board and looking in very practical terms about how we can narrow risk profile. Thanks.
Tom, one point I would add on that too, and when we talk about the suppliers, sort of acting correctly and notifying us of vulnerabilities they're aware of, that also is a two-way street. And I know I'm aware of, penetration testing, against business systems and operational technologies, red teaming activities which take place in the industry, and having the acknowledgement by the suppliers that they will address those issues that are identified by the railroads. So they may know about things and want to tell us, but we also may know about issues and want to tell them. And I think, you know, it's definitely a two-way street when it comes to vulnerability management.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the very extensive comments and insights. We have additional 15 minutes, so, and I want also to answer some of the questions. So we together, let's complete the presentation, and we wanted to speak about simple PTC architecture and use connectivity within this network and the challenges. But I think that we covered that during the previous slides with the comments. So I'll jump over this slide and talk about the key capabilities, generic capabilities that we, when we speak about those challenges that we mentioned, what do we want to see in a solution? And the third thing that we want to see in when we protect the system is to have visibility. We want to see all the assets within the network. We want to see if the existing network, the existing assets are visible, and also the ones that we shouldn't be there and they are there. So for example, if a computer, laptop or any computer was connected for maintenance reasons, and the person that maintained the system forgot that computer, we want to understand that it's still there. It might be an additional attack surface to the network. So visibility is a super important capability in terms of cybersecurity, and the ones here that also familiar with other industries, it's not unique to the rail industry. In every industry, it's the same. The second thing, once we have visibility, we want to, of course, detect the threats and to mitigate the risk and maximize the resilience. I think it's obvious. Specifically for the rail industry, and we spoke about it as well, the connection between security and operations is super important. It's not only that we want to detect threats, we want to understand what to do when we detect a threat, or we detect a threat actor within the network. We want to understand what to do. And what to do means if we need to alert the people in the operational control center, if we can, of the people that the people from cybersecurity perspective can do something with that threat. If we want to stop the operations, whatever we want to say, we need to have common language between the people that are responsible for cybersecurity and the people that are responsible for operation. And last but not least is the segmentation. Common practice in cybersecurity is that we want to build segments based on the level of risk of each segment in terms of risk impact from one hand, and the ability to implement a cyber attack on this segment. So the risk, we want to have segments that whenever an attacker succeeded to get into this segment, so for example, the enterprise network, he won't be able to go to another segment that might made a huge impact on the operations and safety. Practically, systems are connected. They are not segmented. In future, we expect them to be segmented, but not all of them are segmented. So the way to deal with that, the capability that we are looking for, is virtual segmentation that's based on policies that whenever someone is trying to move from one segment to the other, the system will notify, and people that are responsible for the system will be able to manage that. So these are the capabilities. Mark, Tom, any comments on that?
I mean, just real quick, whatever framework you're using, it's probably going to start with an understanding of the assets. You know, what are the assets included and what's the state of each of those assets? So that's a critical, you know, baseline starting point for any cybersecurity program.
I had 2 points. One, building on Mark's comment, and he's been a part of these assessments in the past. Through the Rail Information Security Committee, the involved railroads, which account for the vast majority of operations infrastructure in the US and Canada, have benchlined their cybersecurity programs and posture against initially international standards, and now more recently in the past few years, the National Institute of Standards and Technology Cybersecurity Framework. And what that approach has done is allow us collectively to understand on a continuing basis how we're progressing in maturity of cybersecurity measures and actions and policies and procedures in the context of an evolving threat. And so the railroads do a very thorough job of evaluating their own posture. We end up with a collective product, and the result is railroads having their own individual results that they can apply in terms of how they're enhancing their cybersecurity program, and in fact have that inform proposals to senior levels of the organization on necessary investments. But also collectively as industry, we're able to see where there may be gaps or trends in some of the work that's been done in terms of the assessment results, and we can focus efforts on working collectively to resolve those. Interestingly enough, when TSA issued a security directive focusing on assessments, one of the alternative measures we requested was allowing railroads to use the work they've done in this cybersecurity framework assessments as an alternative to the form that TSA provided. We didn't win that point, but certainly the work that the railroads do in the NIST assessments is what's being applied in their answers to the questions in the TSA assessment. I think the other element that merits attention here is some of the capabilities that you highlighted were actually part of considerations and design in positive train control, particularly asset visibility and virtual segmentation. Mark made the point earlier about segmenting operations from other information technology networks. So we've had that. We also have within positive train control the virtual segmentation to limit the ability of any breach to expand beyond the particular segment that's accessed. Short-term encryption approaches, and I think perhaps most importantly, the commitment that railroads have demonstrated to monitoring networks, identifying anomalies, and acting upon those and reporting them for broader awareness. Thanks.
Thank you. So what are the ways to choose solutions that fit rail operational systems? So the first thing is ease of installation. And Tom just mentioned that, for example, PTC was designed with cybersecurity measures and segmented, and then all the other things. But at the end, cyber is evolved over time, and we need to continue to improve our systems. But with systems that are safety critical, or for PTC is not safety critical, but is part of the safety environment, we need at the end to be able to install it without impacting safety in operations. We don't want to have systems, cybersecurity solution that interfere with the safety of the pre-designed system. The second thing is that at the end, rail protocols, the application layer is the most important layer for safety. The lower layers of the IT stack, or the IT stack, is the network stack, are important to secure, but the messages, the communication in the application layer is the communication, the commands and the telemetries that are responsible for safety, and we want to protect also this layer, not only the lower layers. We want to support more than the IT technologies. Then once we detect and we understand that there is a need, if we get a suggestion of patching a system, will it be possible? Can we implement that practically? We want to have a solution that is able to overcome this challenge of implementing. By the way, patching is not only patching practically during operations, it's all the process of developing this patch, approving it for the safety case, and then implementing that. It might take months for the manufacturer to implement it once a vulnerability is found. And then this long process, during this long process, the system is vulnerable. So what do we do? How do we manage it? The threat, existing threat, in case that the threat is not known and public, and everyone, the threat actors knows about that. The way to deal with that, by the way, is to be able to, in a non-intrusive way, to make sure that no one is trying to leverage this vulnerability before having the patch implemented within the network. And the last one is a database we want to see, and Mark and Tom highlighted it as well, the importance of our assets, our RHEL specific assets, to understand what we have in the network and always to make sure that everything is there. Mark, Tom, comments about that?
Yeah, I think I agree with your comments. Nothing further to add. So hoping we can get a couple of questions in.
Yeah.
To get to know Tom.
Yeah, I'll defer for the questions.
Okay, so let's split the, actually, so we won't speak about our product, Silus product, but whoever wants to speak with us about our product for onboard protection and for signaling infrastructure, just we'll share the information about how to reach out to us, and be happy to answer. So we can, and now Amy, please allow us to answer questions for the coming meeting.
Yes, we do have a few questions coming in, so I want to make sure we have some time for these. With the overall threats of cybersecurity coming fast and furious these days, how do you recommend, or how often do you recommend conducting a security audit or cybersecurity audit on your system?
Yeah. So Mark, I think that you have most experience in many.
Yeah, I mean, I think to me, it's really probably accomplished at a couple of levels. So I believe that there's sort of an audit level, which is the overall environment, and that maybe every couple of years. But I think you also need to have interspersed in there, and we worked every year with our audit, internal audit team, and also external auditors to do this type of testing. But they would have an audit plan. It was based on risk assessments within the company. That's the right way to do it. Where is the risk? We should go look in those areas first. And so most rails, I think, have programs like that. But you're going to want to drill in pretty deep on some of your critical systems, and you probably don't have enough resources to do that on a yearly basis. But each year you should be looking at, I would say, a couple of critical systems, and at least every other year looking at your overall program. You have to have enough time to address those things that you find in between the assessments.
Perfect.
Mark.
This probably is again for Mark. Mark, when working with other partners, whether intermodal, short lines, regionals that use the infrastructure, they might not have as sophisticated a cybersecurity program. How did you work with that, with different levels of different partnership?
Well, the one thing that I will say is, since I left one of the big railroads, I have been working some with some of the short lines, and it is a different level and a different approach, I think, is required in those cases, because they just simply don't have the scale of the resources to do as much as some of the larger railroads, but they also don't have as much assets to protect. So I think it's appropriate that it's not as large. And they are also, from my experience, extremely focused on the topic, which is the most important aspect, I think. So again, it goes back to sort of the business climate. You can't have the security team be the ones that are completely accountable for the security. It has to be an enterprise-wide effort, and you have to have the support. And I think I've seen that evolve clearly over the last, I would say, 10 years, to the point where it's pretty good now, I think, across the industry.
Perfect. Tom, this one might be more directed to you. Will the Railway Alert Network be part of automatically broadcasted alerts directly to the train control operator centers, including PTC support centers?
So the Railway Alert Network, the way we function, we have an audience of recipients that is quite broad. It's in security and law enforcement, cybersecurity, operations, other aspects of the railroad. And then beyond that, railroads have the ability to take the information we provide and put it to the right components of their organizations. And we specifically encourage that in each product. So we've developed a consistent approach for how we disseminate information that does align with very often what the railroads have identified as the key recipients in their organizations. We would continue to do that in the situation raised here with a concern potentially about the functioning of positive train control. The key point, though, is all of this is driven by proactive attentiveness to what's going on in the networks and reporting by railroads. And that gives us the opportunity to identify potential areas of concerns and highlight it for the industry. And then, as I said, railroads have an ability to share beyond that within their organizations and often with their customers, shippers, and local law enforcement support as well. Thanks.
Perfect. Amir or Mark, are there any standards that you would recommend for cybersecurity? Someone's asking if using ISA 99 as a reference would solve some of the cybersecurity problems. So just any thoughts on standards?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of them. You can go, Amir. I think you're.
Right, that's fine.
I mean, I was just going to say there's a lot available. I think the important thing is picking one. Thinking about your risk, picking one. So that the frameworks often come with templates for standards, which can be implemented. Policies are a big part of that. So you have to work through that stuff. But I would say, yeah, there's a plethora that are available. We tended to focus a lot on some of the NIST frameworks because what we found is conversations with, with sort of government were easier because they understood NIST.
Yeah, I'll just say that NIST is a great framework. There is an initiative of building a global standard based on IC 62443 and TS 5701. Whoever knows that. It's a standard that is designed from scratch for the rail industry. It's at this point only technical specification, but it will become standard next year. So, and it's aligned with the NIST framework. So I agree with Mark that NIST is good one. I believe that next year we'll have a better one.
Perfect. We had another question about, are there known rail-specific threats that have been identified? They're saying the majority of threat actors typically target traditional IT vulnerabilities in OT environments. If there is specific rail threat, should a company prioritize a specific PTC vulnerability versus a links vulnerability?
I mean, Tom, I don't know, maybe you can, I think I agree. And I would also say it's probably the threats you don't know about right now, which are the ones you should be most worried about. But when you know about them, and when anybody knows about them, I think the alerting process is really what you rely on. I mean, hopefully you're not the first person to encounter the threat. You'll hear about it, from someone else, and that allows you. That's why the importance of the timely and sort of actionable flow of information is so critical. I mean, any advantage you can give yourself to kind of minimize the, or take advantage of the window opportunity that you do have is going to be a helpful thing.
And just building on that point, again, we get back to the theme I added earlier. What are we doing to leverage what we can do well? And sharing information on threats of concern is vital. This is an area we place a lot of effort, not just reporting by railroads of what they're seeing, but also trying to get insights from government on what it's seeing, particularly across sectors and across transportation modes. So again, as I noted earlier, we're operating under a mandate. Railroads must report cybersecurity incidents to the federal government through the Cybersecurity and Security Agency. And on top of that, you have emphasis by CISA on, in the current environment, lowering the reporting threshold to what they've termed the least level possible. So being very expansive in what's getting reported. In both of those priorities, there comes responsibility. And from our vantage, that responsibility is making sure you're getting good analysis across government agencies of what's being reported, not just by railroads, but by other transportation organizations, by entities in other sectors. That's where we're going to get insights on developing trends, on developing threats. And I don't think we're there yet. I don't think we're at the place where we're getting that sorts of insight. So we're getting information on what threats are known based on, one example being the Russian capabilities to execute cyber attacks and the impetus for the war in Ukraine as a cause to do so. What we learn about how other threat actors are exploiting particular types of vulnerabilities. But I think where we really need to close the gap and where we can make a difference in early awareness of threats is ensuring that cross-sector, cross-modal analysis is getting accomplished. The reason why CISA has emphasized lowering the reporting threshold is the greater ability to identify patterns, trends, indicators that might in particular highlight a Russian state-sponsored activity in the current environment. We need to have that same ethic apply across the board because while we're focused, I think rightly on Russia, you have other highly accomplished, highly sophisticated threat actors that can be exploiting that focus to advance their own objectives. So I think that gap that needs to be closed, and I'm not alone in saying this in the railroad industry, this view is held by many across sectors, is let's make sure we're using what's being reported to best possible effect. And, so often you get government officials lamenting we're not seeing enough reporting. And my response is, what are you doing with the reporting you have? What are you doing to analyze it to help us understand where those potential trends and patterns and indicators are? Or that there is none of that present, which is valuable information as well. We need to get into that habit, but that's the role government can play very effectively, filling that gap. Thanks.
Perfect. Amir, we have a question regarding Cyrus. Have you been used in North America light rail and or heavy rail applications?
So we are working closely with rail companies around the world, implemented that, and we are now in process of working closely with railroads and transit authorities in the US markets.
Perfect. Well, I want to be conscious of everyone's time. I know we're over a little bit, so I wanted to give our three panelists today a chance to give final thoughts. I'll start with Tom. Just any final thoughts to the audience?
First up, thank you for devoting time to this important subject. It is an exceptional opportunity when you're privileged, as I am today, to appear with two accomplished professionals in this area, and also to see Amy Brown, who I've dealt with many times by email and phone, but had not had a chance to see in person. Hopefully we'll get to meet in the not too distant future at another event. But just thank you. Your participation in an event like this demonstrates your commitment. And we didn't get to all the questions. I actually followed up with one who submitted a number of questions to address those separately. But those questions indicate your commitment. And I thank you for that. That's going to make the difference between a serious event taking place and are being prepared to avoid it because you're taking the right sorts of steps and you're leveraging the right capabilities to now your organization's susceptibility. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. And Mark, any final thoughts for the audience?
Yeah, just real quick. Again, also, kind of mirror Tom's comments on the appreciation of people participating. I think these kind of conversations are important. I also think the sort of active engagement of the supplier community that we talked about is important. We have to be able to collaborate with suppliers who can help us bring solutions as well. So I appreciate Amir participating in this, and again, thanks everybody, and I'm glad I was able to participate.
Wonderful. Thanks, Mark. And finally, Amir, any final thoughts for our audience?
Yes. So also want to thank Mark and Tom for the extensive answers and the insights and the huge experience they bring to this important session. And to the audience that asked a lot of questions that we'll make sure that will be answered after this session. Just one note about the importance of dealing in the tension between safety and cybersecurity. Both are important. We need to deal with cybersecurity similar to the important, the best way that the market knows or the railroads know how to deal with safety. Both are important, both impact on each other. we're doing it perfectly till now, which we need to continue to work on this topic. Thank you very much. And thank you, Amy, for hosting us. Thank you.
Oh, no problem. Thank you again to Silas for sponsoring this event. Thank you to Amir, Mark, and Tom for being our excellent panelists and subject matter experts today. Again, this is a very important topic for the industry and one that is, unfortunately, I don't think is going away anytime soon, right? So we see new threats every day, but it's important to have a handle on that and to have systems in place so your organization is not vulnerable. Just a reminder, you will get a copy of today's slides as a follow-up, and we will be sending over all of the questions that were asked today to Amir's team for any follow-up afterwards. So thank you again, and we hope to see you on another Progressive Railroading webcast in the future. Have a wonderful day, everyone. And Amir, it looks like the sun's gone down there, so I think you're done for the day now.
Probably a hidden slide, yeah. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you again, everyone. Have a wonderful day.